say with my leadership style, one of the biggest things I do is I like to lead with an element of trust. I've never been one, only because I've suffered it, and I know there's a place for this, but I have suffered working for quite a lot of micromanagers, and I find that suffocating and sometimes insulting.
Which personal qualities are needed to succeed as a military fighter pilot?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question to start with. So for me, there has to be a huge level of loyalty, and that's the biggest thing. When you're out there, yes, you're by yourself, and you have to look after yourself, and you have to make sure that you've prepared yourself in order to be as good as you can be for the team. But loyalty is the big thing there that binds the whole team together. So there's that one team approach. You never go out by yourself. If you go out by yourself, and in the fight part, well, we say if you lose your wingman, then there's no point being there, because you just won't be able to survive. So the loyalty is about preparing yourself properly to be the best you can be, but that binds that team together so that when you're out as a whole unit, a whole formation, a whole squadron, you've got each other's back, and it's absolute trust. You mentioned there being a fighter pilot, being in the fighter pilot world. What does that mean? That is traveling at high speeds. Sometimes we're moving. You talk about a car being miles a minute, miles an hour. I do apologize. 20 miles an hour in a car. That's in the jet. When you're actually shifting, you're probably doing 15 miles every minute. So you're going fast. You're covering a lot of ground. And if you've got someone who's 100 miles ahead of you coming at you at the same speed, you guys are crossing within about 2.5, 3 minutes. So it's happening fast. There's a lot of information coming in. Your bodies are under extreme pressure in terms of the forces of gravity getting pushed upon it. There's so much information that you're trying to sieve through to make sure you get the right information to the right person and make the right outcome. And if you don't have each other's back within that, then you won't last past the end of the runway, really. So the loyalty is a huge one, and dedication to a cause. That's that buy-in to what you're there for. It's great. And I must admit, it's a nice little ego stroke to say, a fighter pilot, and that's what we went off and did, but that's not what you're there for. And if that's what your aim was to say what you've become, again, I can only say what I've just said a minute ago, you won't last past Monday. It's about understanding there's a bigger cause. It's about having that big picture understanding of who you are in that structure, where you're going to go, and how you can do your best to fit within that team. And that covers a variety of things to talk about in terms of how you select your team, how you build your team, how you communicate that, how you brief each other on what you're expected to do on that particular day, how you execute that, and then most importantly, how you create that environment to allow people to learn through failure. If you go in there, as I say a minute ago, it's nice to have the little ego rub, but if you go in there thinking that you're the best and you're there for the wrong reasons, as I say, if you're getting told by the end of Monday that you've failed in so many certain areas, and by the way, you do every day. We all do, don't we? So if you're not prepared to learn from those, then again, if you can't see the big picture and have the dedication to go through that process, then unfortunately it won't work out for you.
What role does communication play as a pilot?
Without sounding too drastic, communication and effective communication is by far the difference between life and death, which sounds incredibly stark, but it's true. There is the darker side to being a fighter pilot, and that is sometimes to go out and do what military units do, and that is sometimes you have to act in a violent way in order to get a job done, and we do everything we can to avoid ever having to be there. If we take that one example, and communication means that we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, at the wrong height with the wrong target, and we think there's only us out there when actually there's 4 or 5 different airplanes. I mentioned the speed. I've mentioned the fact you pull in 8, 9 times the force of gravity. I mean, just to put that into context, the human head weighs about a stone. And I don't want to upset anyone who might listen to this who might be on a diet, but your head will still weigh a stone. So when we're flying in those corners, our heads are weighing about between 7 and 9 stone. So that's how much force is going through the neck. So, if you think how much pressure, like physical pressure you're being pushed under, if you're not getting the right information whilst dealing with that and you misinterpret it, or you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, the outcome could be drastic. And unfortunately, there have been times over nearly 20 years of military flying that we've gone to work and not everyone has come home. And that's even just in a training environment, let alone out there when you're doing it for real. Now that's just in the fighter pilot world. You bring that all the way back down. That's the high end, top end flying. I can bring that back to the Red Arrows. you've ever been at a Red Arrow show, you might have heard it all sounds a bit funny, like the squeaking and the quirk on the radio. A lot of people pick us up for it, saying, why'd you do that? It sounds ridiculous. But actually, how good is effective communication in that scenario? Well, actually, it's vital, or else we don't know when we're turning, we don't know when we're looping, we don't know when the smoke's coming on. And if we're not all in sync, executing what we're told at the right time through the channels of communication, then you're not world class. And when you're going out every day with the one aim to be the best in the world, if your communication channels fail, then there's no way you could possibly be that. And so that was a huge thing for us. And actually, if you do, and I encourage anyone who hasn't, go to a Red Arrow show, stand near a speaker and do listen to the shouting at each other and using these weird code words and sounding funny. And it is ridiculous, but that's all code to each other to keep performing, keep going, do this, do that, because that's why we're looking good on the ground. And, you know, sometimes they say, well, why'd you shout? Well, how many times have you been to a dinner party and sat next to someone with a monotone voice and had the worst dinner party you've ever been to? Or how many times have you been to a dinner party, walked in and someone's got a flamboyant shirt on, and you thought, I don't want to sit next to them. But then when they get talking, their stories are amazing, and they open up the room, and it just shows that actually it's the tone of communication as well that gets the most out of it. And I had an amazing position. In my last year in the Red Arrows in 2019, I was also the executive officer. And there was some points in the show where I would make a call from the back of the formation to the leader, who's about 130, 140 feet ahead of me. He can't see me because he's just looking out the front, making sure we're all safe. And it's a needless call in a way. It didn't affect anything that the airplanes did. It didn't affect anything that we were about to do. It was not an information call in terms of how we need to act as a team. But what it was an information tone, a call set in a tone that was either excited, which said to the team, hey boys, you're doing really well, keep it up. Or it was said in a slow voice, almost like bored, which said, guys, this isn't good, pick it up. You know, and it's kind of like a whip, if you like. I was whipping the team at that point to halfway through to say from the assessment of where I was at the back of the formation where I could see everyone where we're at. So that was really important because that then affected the next 15, 20 minutes. You know, that then set the tone for the learning process when we got back, when we went into the debrief. And we could go into that even deeper. But you know, if we then go into the third section of communication, well, in my experience, you know, going back to the front line, those 4 aircraft being sent over the horizon, maybe in the dark of night to do a mission, or the 9 jets doing a Red Arrows display anywhere in the world to a world-class level, none of that happens without the hundreds of men and women behind it who work day and night to make sure those airplanes safe. And that communication comes from the pilot telling the engineer, look, the airplane's not performing this way. And it sounds ridiculous. It might look like a bit of metal to people, but I can promise you, when you're strapped to those airplanes, they have personality. You know, I spoke to you about, you know, riding horses, and each horse I know has its own personality. I don't know, but I hear people talk about, oh, this one's got that temperament, or this one's a little bit slow, or this one's a bit jumpy, or whatever. I promise you, it sounds ridiculous, but those airplanes, they might as well be alive, and they speak to you. And so it's about how you then feel that energy through that metal, really, and how you communicate that to the engineers to make sure that it's being serviced, to make sure that there's 9 ready to go for the next show, that those guys who come in on a Friday night don't feel like they're coming in needlessly on a Friday night to fix the airplane, because on Saturday they can look up and see, you know, the red, white, and blue over Buckingham Palace with 150,000 people watching it, you know. And that's the line of communication. It goes all the way from the person sweeping the hangar floor for the reasons why people come in to fix the airplanes, the reason why the airplane gets airborne, why it flies over the Queen, why it goes around the world as a world-class system, and why the rest of the Air Force take their airplanes anywhere in the world and do an amazing job.
So you mentioned your role as an executive officer. How would you describe your leadership style?
I would say with my leadership style, one of the biggest things I do is I like to lead with an element of trust. You know, I've never been one, only because I've suffered it, and I know there's a place for this, but I have suffered working for quite a lot of micromanagers, and I find that suffocating and at sometimes insulting even. But I do understand if the pressure's on and someone's in a high position, they might want a lot of information quickly, and that's different to micromanaging. That is needing information to continue to make time-based decisions in order to react to a situation that's probably changing in front of you. But my example being with that is when you're led without trust. So they ask you to do something, and then you find out 3 people have been asked for it, and then you get constant updates when, you know, there's a process. So I like to trust my team that they're going to go out and do the job for me. So that is built, and I've been very lucky that has been built off a very processed, dedicated and thoughtful selection process. So when they've come through that selection process, we then train them up to a certain level. Once they've gone through that, I was a true believer that now you can trust that product. You give them an option, you give them a timeline, you give them a task, and I would go and expect them to do it. So I think trust is a huge part of that, and that then comes out in everything. That's, you know, they then trust you more, or, you know, they then trust that you've got their back, or they then trust that you value what they can deliver. And so I think that's a huge aspect. I also believe, we've already mentioned it, in communication underpins all of that. So you have to be clear in what you do. And so, you know, I give everyone the opportunity to, once I brief, to come back with me and say, look, just clarify this. I don't believe in anything is a stupid question. If we've briefed for a task and you don't know what's going on, you have to ask. And so I do that. And also the final thing is, I just like to challenge every now and then. And that's not to highlight deficiencies, or I hate to do that. I hate embarrassing people. And if I accidentally do it, I'm embarrassed myself. But what I like to do is challenge in a number of ways. I like to challenge what I've just asked people to do. You know, is that the right way to do it? You know, or I give them a scenario. For example, you know, let's say we're in a red arrow display, right? We're at this particular bend, we're upside down at this point, and this emergency happens for another aircraft over here. So I pose that problem. What are you going to do? And then I'll find some of my team, and I'll challenge them to come up with a result for that. And that gets the mind of the whole team thinking. There's no right or wrong answer. Well, there could be a wrong answer, to be fair, and that would be to make it worse. But, you know, that maybe their answer might make it worse. So it's like, okay, fine. Well, actually, how about this? And I'll let the other team feed into it. So I like it to be open. I like to deal with problems openly, albeit still leading the charge. And then I also like people challenge me, as I say, to come back and say, why are we doing this? There's nothing worse, and I can think we can all appreciate this. There's nothing worse than just turning up until the clock says 6 and we can go home. Mm-hmm. You know, that's not what I believe in. You know, if you're done by 2, go home at 2. If you're not going to get done till 10, we say it's 10. If we have to, you know, that's not hard and fast. But my point is, I would never ask someone to turn up, share their face, and just work till the clock says 6. So I always like people to have an aim and an objective and a task to complete.